Hi, everyone. I'm honored to introduce my author and my friend, Jackie Walsh. Jackie began her career in education as a high school social studies teacher, and that is where her passion for classroom questioning began. Jackie has served in leadership and curriculum development roles and as a researcher in a regional educational lab. But what Jackie most enjoys, and I've seen this firsthand, is working in classrooms with teachers and students and learning from them. Her recent work with the Oxford, Alabama School District has really deepened her understanding of the power of student questions. Jackie has written 5 books for Corwin, best-selling books, I should add, including Quality Questioning, which is in its 2nd edition, and her most recent one, which is the subject of this webinar. And I want to leave her a lot of time, so I'll stop there, although I could go on. So welcome, Jackie.
Thank you so much, Jessica, and thank you, Jeff, and thanks to all of you who have joined us on this Monday afternoon at a time that for many who live in Central and Eastern time would be dinner time, I think. So appreciate your being here. I want to begin by focusing or having you focus on the why of student questions. Simon Sinek says to us, we should begin with the why, not as we so often do with the what and the how. We're definitely getting to the what and the how this afternoon in the webinar, but I want to invite you to take just a few seconds to reflect on why you think, at least at this moment in time, student questions are important. I want to give you about 15 seconds for this reflection and ask you to type in the chat box one reason why you believe student questions to be important. Please do not press return or enter until I ask you to, because I'd like for everyone to have a chance to think using kind of some think time 1, and then for us to be able to view a cascade of responses that we can look at and compare responses to our own. So about 15 seconds to think and to record, not enter your answer to this question, and I'll give you the signal when you should press enter. Okay, if you would, go. You may now enter your responses. I hope we'll be able to note many coming forth. And as you view the responses, would you please compare, contrast what you see to what you entered, look for affirmation and look for patterns. And again, we'll take another 12 to 15 seconds for you to see who else is here and to view some of their thinking. Please continue your thinking and entry of responses. If you've not completed, we'd like to save these because I'd like to know your thinking. I was excited to see such a range of thoughts and excited to see a number of you call out the fact that hearing student questions lets us know their thinking. Reminds me of John Hattie's visible learning, and indeed that is, I think, one of the reasons why student questions can be so valuable. We'll come back to this at the very end to have a little synthesis of your ideas. But for now, I want to turn your attention to a group of 8th graders who were in a geometry class where student questions were being cultivated. Jared Moore, Oxford Middle School, engaged these students in learning through questioning, and these 7 are going to share with us some of their thoughts as to why this was important to them.
I was kind of thinking recently about more about student questioning, because you have the teachers that always ask questions, but sometimes it's a little hard for the students to be able to. Like, as soon as you enter kindergarten even, you're always encouraged to ask questions if you don't understand the topic. But it doesn't really feel like you get time to get answers to those questions.
7 8th graders are responding to the question of how does the opportunity to develop and ask your own questions support your learning? Teachers in their school are intentionally focusing on the use of quality questioning practices. In their geometry class, the teacher is emphasizing strategies and structures to support students' question asking.
The more our grade goes on, the more harder classes we're taking, the more we're encouraged to take more risks and ask more questions so we can understand the topic more, because I feel like that's like the main way that we learn and comprehend the topic way better.
As we grow older, the classes start to get really a lot harder and more difficult for us. And I think that in order for us to really understand the topic, we have to ask questions. And if we aren't given enough time, then we can't really ask questions that anyone will be able to answer other than a teacher. And if we just have the teacher's perspective, then we won't really, like Annabelle and Tide both said, then we won't really have someone our age or their perspective on it, basically.
If we didn't understand the topic, you may ask your friend, but if they didn't know, they didn't really like take time to think about it. They're always just like, go ask the teacher. So you go ask the teacher, and you would only get her perspective on the thing. And even though that's just what you heard, you think it would help you, but it really doesn't. But when you see students' point of views and how they interpret on your like grade level, it really helps you.
I feel like the class discussions too, after we've thought about our questions to ourselves and we've talked to our partner, I feel like going like the class discussion helps, because then you get to hear everybody's point of view, not just the people that you're sitting around. I was kind of thinking.
I'm wondering if you heard from the students some of your thinking. Based on my review of the chat box, I would say yes. I'm also wondering if they had any perspectives that expanded your thinking about the why. Just reflect, if you would, on what those kids had to say. Pretty powerful. I want to turn now to what will be kind of our learning intentions. I'm calling them focus questions for the afternoon. There are 4. We've already begun exploring the first. I hope by the end of the afternoon, you will have expanded your understanding of the value of student questions. We'll look at the framework that organizes the book and that I hope can help organize your thinking about student questions. There are 4 categories in this taxonomy, and we will explore each of these. I hope you will think about which seems most important to you and for your students. And for each of these 4, we will explore 2 mind frames that students need to develop if they're to become comfortable and active as questioners in these 4 areas. And finally, I'll share with you some strategies and tools, just a sampling of what appear in the book, that teachers can use to help develop the capacity of students as questioners. So that's where we're going. I wanted to give you just a little insight into the evolution of this book, just to let you know that the ideas in the book are not just ideas that came out of my mind. They're ideas that emerged over time. And as I reflected, I thought really 4 different sources. First, and very importantly, over 25 years of work with teachers and students on quality questioning. Again and again, we heard and then we concluded 2 big ideas. One, that student questions can be the keys to student engagement and increased student achievement. Secondly, and very poignantly, we observed that there were very few student questions asked in most classrooms. Taking these 2 ideas and then going to the literature, after extensive reading of literature and research, these 2 conclusions were affirmed. Indeed, researchers find many values to emerge or be related to student questions, but also very few being asked. Very exciting for me, and Jessica mentioned it, was the opportunity I had to test the framework that I developed based upon literature and my own observation, to test it with real teachers and real students, dedicated professionals in Oxford, Alabama. I worked over time with teachers grades 1 through 12 and saw the value of their intentional focus on student questioning. So I want to give a big shout out to Dr. Jeff Goodwin, superintendent of Oxford City Schools, and all of the amazing school leaders, teachers, and students there. And I don't say this just as an aside, because the book is truly enlivened by the stories out of Oxford and by 20 videos. You'll see just a real inkling, or get an inkling of the power of these videos as we move through the afternoon. I'll have an opportunity to share 5 others with you that I think will give you a sense of how we can develop students as questioners. But to return to the why of student questioning, I want to bring from the literature these reasons to your attention. And the first one I think is ever so important. I saw that in the chat, but again and again in the literature, the idea of student ownership and engagement being associated with their ability to form and ask their own questions. Secondly, and so important, is this, that as students are able to ask questions, they're better able to monitor, assess, and regulate their learning to become, as Ron Berger would say, leaders of their own learning. I've mentioned the relationship of student questions to academic performance. We also have evidence that questions and the ability to, and confidence, I might add, to ask them aloud is an important preparation for college and career, and yes, for citizenship as well. These are benefits, I believe, to individual students. There are also benefits that accrue to the classroom learning community, and here are 5. When students ask questions, their classmates benefit, because oftentimes a question is asked that I might have been about something about which I was confused. And so I'm grateful to my classmate. Teacher after teacher in Oxford said to me, the questions my students are now asking are providing the best feedback to me that I could have. And I am reminded of John Hattie's statement that it is student feedback to teachers that really is the most important feedback we can secure. Research tells us too that when we allow students to ask questions, the achievement gap is narrowed. That indeed, low achieving students gain more from question asking than do their high achieving counterparts. This would be, I believe, because they have more to gain, because indeed our very best students do derive a lot from asking questions in class. There's also research to say that when students ask questions, there are fewer disruptions. So now to the organization of the remainder of the afternoon and really of the book. I developed out of the literature and my observations what I call a taxonomy of student questions. It's basically 4 categories or types of questions. You'll see the one in the center, self-questions. That's where it all begins. In fact, all questions are born silently in individual minds, or not in some cases. We'll examine self-questions, though, in a more specific way, as we will also look at academic questions. And I would say academic questions are the ones we may think of most frequently, those questions that students ask when they're confused or when they want to go deeper in the learning, the ones they might ask during class. Exploratory questions are questions of curiosity, of wondering. They're related to the academic, but they really can be springboards for discovery and for that excitement that we hope to see in all of our student learning. The 4th category of questions I call dialogic. And those are questions, of course, that would be posed during dialogue, questions that are designed to get behind another's thinking, to understand what made them say something, and to have a better appreciation for others' perspectives. So the taxonomy of student questions now presented in a linear fashion. You can see some of the major outcomes: self-questions leading to self-regulation, academic to learning and achievement, exploratory to curiosity and motivation, and I think perhaps my personal favorite, and the one most difficult perhaps, to develop, dialogic to understanding other perspectives. Some people would tell you that students would ask questions in class if only they were given the opportunity. This is true of some of our students. It's probably true of some of our best students, or certainly of some of our most confident students. But unfortunately, many of our students do not possess the skill needed to form a question. They don't have the will, the desire, the motivation to ask, and they really don't think it would be that comfortable for them to ask a question in front of their peers. And so one of our jobs as educators, as teachers, is to help our students develop this skill, will, and thrill, and of course have to relate this nice trio to the work of John Hattie, who talks about the skill, will, and thrill of learning. I'm applying it in the book to the skill, will, and thrill of developing students as questioners. And it involves at least three major things on our part as educators. Teaching students how to ask questions is part of the skill. Developing the student understanding in the form of mind frames is, to me, a key to developing the will. And then co-creating with our students a culture where they're comfortable asking can get them to the thrill. So if students don't come prepared, what are teachers to do? I think of teachers as activators of student questions. And in that role, I see three major functions. First, we need to prepare our students to become better questioners, focusing on the mind frames that I'll share with you shortly, providing them with strategies and stems, and most importantly, as I saw a number of you mention, modeling question asking for them by expressing our own curiosities and taking care in the forming of our own questions. A second job we have as teachers is to design lessons where there is room for student questions, or where there would be an opportunity for students to form and ask. This means adopting routines and strategies and protocols that would provide both the time and the structure for the asking. And it means integrating into our daily lessons the opportunity for students to reflect, form, and make public their questions. The third big function for us as teachers is then to engage students. We've prepared them, we've designed our lessons, and now what's going to happen when we go live in a classroom? I suggest that we need to make time and space for those questions, that we need to allow students an opportunity to practice and have feedback on the quality of their questions, and that we need to invite them to reflect. So presenting this as kind of a framework for teacher work, I want to take you into the classroom of Tracy Ray, a third grade teacher at D'Armanville Elementary School in Oxford. Tracy indeed took on the role of activator of student learning. You're going to see now just a very short clip out of a much longer lesson in which Tracy began at the beginning with student mind frames. She provided structures. I want you to just, as you observe this video of Tracy and her students, think back to what do you see in terms of how she might have prepared her students, what she did in lesson design, and what she did specifically to engage them. So just 2 minutes out of Tracy's classroom.
About why we must ask questions, right? And some of the mind frames that we've been focusing on, you have your cards on your desk, and 2 of those we're really going to focus on today. We're going to look back at why we ask questions in class when we're curious, and we're going to look at why we ask questions in class to clarify and deepen our understanding of what we're learning. The students understand exactly why they're asking questions because we always start with the questioning mind frames. The students also are given an opportunity to ask questions, whereas in the past, students may have only been used to answering questions. In science, we've been learning about water, weather, and climate. And you have been asking a lot of great questions that you are curious about, that are challenging questions, that you want to explore more deeply. You've been keeping track of those questions in your science notebook. Today, you have chosen one question that you want to look at more closely. Today, you're going to take your question and you're going to think about the continuum that we've been using in class. And you're going to decide if your question is interesting and complex. And then you'll place your question along the continuum. Why do you think that it's more challenging?
I think it's more challenging because I had to do really a lot of research because when I first started it says about the tilt. It says that the tilt keeps it from the weather not being the same all over the earth.
Okay, so you feel like you're going to have to do a lot more research to answer that question. Why is that question interesting to you? Why are you curious about it?
And then you're going to ask one question. How can we not feel the tilt?
Why is October the driest month?
It's easy to answer and it's not that challenging. And we have some we can do some feedback from books and we can go on our Google Classroom and then we can figure out why it's the driest month. That's why I don't think it's challenging. Well, I disagree with you because think about it. Why is it the driest month?
I'm sorry to have to end this video at this point, but I hope you will just take a moment to reflect on what you saw there in terms of what Tracy was doing to develop students as questioners. I hope you noticed the continuum she was using. You're going to see that a bit later. And I hope you'll also think about how did she go about designing a lesson where students were learning through one another's questions. Now, I want to remind you, if you have a question about this classroom or any of the related content, be sure to type that into the chat box. Jeff is going to be monitoring it so that at come the end of the session, we will take time to answer some of the questions. But moving right along, I want to say a little bit more about mind frames. Certainly, John Hattie popularized the term mind frame as he co-authored a book on 10 mind frames for teachers. I see mind frames as really being kind of the ways of thinking, the attitudes and beliefs that kind of undergird our behavior. And I would submit that students either possess or not mind frames, even as teachers do. And so when it comes to students as questioners, we want to develop their sense that they are both competent, capable, and confident as questioners. We want to give them a personal why for asking questions. And so we will take a look at the mind frames that correlate to the 4 question types, one at a time, beginning with self-questions. For self-questions, there are 2 mind frames because there are 2 categories of self-questions that I feature in this book. The first are those questions that students ask themselves to monitor their learning, to self-regulate. And so I really strongly recommend that we be very explicit with students about the need to ask themselves questions as they reflect on their learning, monitor and assess it. With this particular form of question, as with others I'll share with you, I want to call out one of many tools in the book related to the development of self-questions. If you have a book, perchance by your sides, you see the page number on which this appears, but this is a cycle of student self-questioning to learn, composed of 6 questions that I believe need to be directly and explicitly taught to students. That they ask at the beginning as they look at the learning intentions or learning targets, what am I trying to learn? And then that they self-assess, what do I think I know right now? And you see on around the cycle. If I were in the classroom, I would have a huge graphic organizer with this cycle on it. Hope that I can go into some classrooms in the future that will have that. So one category of self-questions is about self-regulation. The other is about comprehension. Many of you will remember the 2000 report from the National Reading Panel and the recommendation from that panel that teachers explicitly teach students to ask questions as they are reading in order to better comprehend. And so our mind frame for this type question is this. I ask questions to figure out the meaning of what I'm reading or hearing and to think through problems and tasks, because self-questions are no less important in math and science than they are in reading. For the tool, I feature here some prompts for student self-questions in mathematical thinking. Many of you, elementary teachers in particular, will be very familiar with the before, during, and after questions in reading. This is kind of a companion for mathematical problem solving, beginning with starter questions as students initially attack a problem. Moving to the middle column, questions that stimulate mathematical thinking. These would be the questions students might be asking themselves as they're working on a problem. And finally, assessment questions. So I think I've finished it. I think I've solved the problem. I can hear my math teachers whispering in my ear, go back and check your work. Well, what do? I ask myself assessment questions. I recommend that teachers provide this as a tool to their students and give them practice in using it in order to develop better their skills in mathematical problem solving. I want to move now to a 4th grade classroom that of Brittany Pinkard at Coldwater Elementary School in Oxford. This is an ELA class. Brittany has worked with her students on self-questions. She's also working with them on academic questions. And in this particular lesson, you'll see that she has developed a strategy to help students think about what makes a good question. And she's doing this in the context of helping them better understand an author's point of view. So as you view this video, would you think about what students might be gaining from this activity devised by Brittany, both in terms of content knowledge as well as in questioning skills?
Brittany Pinkard provides her 4th graders with models of quality questions as she seeks to support them in developing good questions of their own. Her goal is for the students to ask and answer questions so that they better understand what they're reading. In this lesson, students are rotating through stations to learn more about the characteristics of good questions. At a number of the stations, they collaboratively analyze questions to decide if they meet the criteria provided by their teacher.
I think this was more of a question because you actually have a good answer to it, but this one isn't because it's just a yes or no answer. And I think this one has more words and it lets you talk more about it. Then this one doesn't give you it doesn't really make you write anything. Okay, let's go over our quality assessment. Makes you think. It requires more than a simple yes or no, 2 or 3 words. I think it does make us. It makes me think back in the text. It's understandable. It clearly communicates to others. I think it does.
At one station, they formulate questions of their own using these same criteria.
And what I want you to do is I want you to think of a question, okay, as you are skimming through this, rereading through this, thinking of a question that would maybe help you understand the author's point of view, changing your mind frame and shifting from, it's not about my questions, because, my questions aren't as important as their questions, and their questions can, really funnel in and really get to the magic of it all.
Brittany Pinkard provides.
And so, again, turning off these students a bit earlier than I would have liked, but take a moment to reflect on what the students may be learning from this activity. What you think about the structure that Brittany provided on that day. You may have noticed that the students were using criteria to assess questions. In fact, it was these 5 criterion that are provided in the book as criteria for student-created academic questions. All questions are not created equal, and we want our student questions to take them deeper in their learning. So another tool for their use in preparing academic questions, I call these the workhorse of all the questions. They're the ones we hope to hear when we walk in classrooms and observe. We're the ones we hope students are generating as they're listening to a lecture in a high school classroom, perhaps, or as they're reading and they think of a question to take out of that reading. The mind frame associated, I pose questions to clarify and deepen my understanding of academic content. The third form or type of question I call exploratory questions. These are questions of curiosity and wonderment. They are the kinds of questions that Brian Goodwin writes about in his book that has been published by Corwin, that is entitled, let me be sure I get this title right, Building a Curious School. What I love about the title of this book is actually the subtitle, Restoring the Joy That Brought You to School. Exploratory questions can put joy back in the classroom because they're the questions that are the what if questions. They're the questions of imagine that. They're the questions that can be springboards to learning. I offer as a tool here, a tool that lays out for students specific skills associated with forming these type questions, an indication of when to use a particular skill, and then some sample prompts and stems. And again, these are resources, tools you can put in the hands of students. And I would just share with you that I have similar tools related to all 4 question types, not just to the exploratory ones. But let's now go to a high school classroom where the teacher, Meredith Barkley, is working with a class on this day to generate exploratory questions that she hopes will kind of guide, incite their interest in an upcoming unit on cell communication. During this video, we're going to hear more of Meredith's reflection about the importance of these questions, as well as about the challenge of managing them in the classroom, about how she engages students to create questions that she subsequently can use in lesson design. I'll give you this much background on the class. The students had tasted or allowed miracle berries to dissolve on their tongue in order to see how that would affect their taste buds. Following this, they generated some questions, and you'll see in the video how they move these questions from kind of rough drafts to more final format, and you'll hear Meredith's thinking about it. So into the biology classroom at Oxford High School.
You're going to take a minute to discuss maybe what you learned from those conversations. Afterwards, you're going to select the question that you're most proud of, and you're going to place it on the graph where you believe it belongs. Interest level and complexity. When we say complexity, we're talking about how much does my brain have to think? about this question. Doesn't mean it's difficult necessarily on just being wordy, but how much does my question cause my brain to think? If it's highly complex, it's going to be up here. If not, down here. It's very interesting over here. So where's the sweet spot in this graph? And a student said, how could the miracle berry be beneficial to us? Like, what benefits could this have for us? And then she tied up a thought, like her next question was kind of a thought. She said, perhaps, could this help our sugar crazed culture? So I felt like that question showed a lot of thoughts and layers behind it. And it was a question that showed that they could transfer knowledge from just that one experience at their desk to maybe how other people could benefit from the experience as well. I think my students have always had questions about the lessons that they're experiencing, but sometimes I haven't always stopped long enough to hear what they have to say or structured my room so that they had the voice to express those ideas. And so working with quality questioning and thinking about the different types of questions that students could ask, whether it's like self-questions or dialogic or exploratory, really has made me go back in my lesson planning of what's the purpose of what they're doing, you know, like holding me accountable to what the purpose is. And because I think my plan has changed and I'm actually slowing down and creating some space for students to talk, I feel like my students have gotten better at asking and communicating those questions with each other. So now the struggle and the excitement for the teacher is coming through their questions and figuring, you know, which ones can we dive into and which ones would we spend more time on. But that would encourage students that their questions actually matter when their teachers take the time to stop, listen, and use that question as a springboard for another lesson.
One of the things I really appreciated in Tracy's final comments, in Meredith's final comment, was the recognition that when we ask students to generate questions, then we need to have a plan for using them. You noted that she was using the same tool that Tracy Ray was using in her classroom for students to assess the quality of a question. There were two axes. One, the bottom one, I think related to the level of interest the students might have in the question. That would have been your x-axis. The y-axis was the level of complexity. So you notice the quadrant that was high complexity, high interest was upper right-hand quadrant. We now come to that question type that I think is so important, dialogic questions. The mind frame, I use questions to understand other perspectives and to engage in collaborative thinking and learning. I'm sharing in the right-hand column some sample routines and protocols that teachers can use to structure the creation of those dialogical questions as well as the asking and answering of them. The one that I think you'll all resonate with is Think, Pair, Share. I observed in some elementary classrooms in Oxford very skillful use of Think, Pair, Share. And I would shout out to Keilani, the first grade teacher who was just amazing in her use of Think, Pair, Share, getting her students to engage in listening to one another and respectfully agreeing and disagreeing. That's Keilani Bohannon, a first grade teacher at Coldwater. So I would like, though, to have you think about your view of Socratic circles and a very closely related cousin there too, the fishbowl with the inside-outside group, and let you see how Adam Clark, U.S. history teacher in Oxford, used this with his students as they were looking at the Versailles Treaty and Wilson's 14 points following World War I. I'll tell you about this lesson. Adam had the students prepare their questions in advance to bring to the circle. But what I'd like you to pay particular attention to are the questions that emerged during the dialogue that students ask of one another to better understand the perspective. So here we are with some 11th graders at Oxford High School.
My question was, how much of an impact did Woodrow Wilson's peace program have on the 14 points? I have a question for Micah or Jackson, either one of y'all. My question is, did the other countries or the people that actually were in this, did they even see it to be peaceful, or did they see it as him trying to change them?
I think they may have been divided. So some probably thought that could maybe see that he was trying to get peace to this, and then some were probably thinking, well, he's just trying to take control of us and gain more power for the U.S.
So when you said control, what did you mean? Like, were there like certain statements that were made, or were there just something like that?
One thing I'm noticing about student questioning is that it can be a great formative assessment for me on their learning, because I can gauge their understanding of the material based on the questions they are asking. So if the questions are on the surface level trying to gain that content knowledge, then that lets me know that they're struggling in that area, as opposed to if they're trying to take it to a more deeper application level with their question.
You know, like people say, like, two wrongs don't make a right. So, like, we saw how bad they were trying, like, Germany was trying to treat other people. So why don't we answer that by trying to treat them badly? Like, how's that going to make peace?
I think that it was more towards not being bad, even though that's how it comes off. I believe it's more limitations, so that way they don't have the resources to do it.
Yeah.
I believe it was just more in order to protect themselves instead of putting their lives in danger. I feel that, yes, it was for them for safer wise, but I also feel that it was limitation out of fear.
So oftentimes we say our students aren't getting it. They're not getting the material. They're not understanding these things. Well, if they're not getting that, we maybe need to change our approach. So how about, instead of us leading them to the water and trying to force them to drink, why not give them a chance to question and get to it on their own, and see how much they retain and understand the content when they get to it on their own, and give the students a little bit more credit for their thinking than I think that we oftentimes try to give them. If the students can ask questions, they have come to understand it in their own way and made meaning of it for themselves. And an example of that is through the connections that they make, maybe with previous content.
My question was,
That reminds me a bit, Adam's last statement, of something I read by J.T. Dillon years ago. Dillon said, if you can ask a question, you've got 2/3 of the answer. So to have our students grapple, to form those questions, to dig into the content, to identify the ideas we're thinking about and form them, I do agree so with Adam. So much better that than our trying to force their drinking of it. I've seen in the chat box mention of a culture that values student questions, a culture where students are comfortable. I identify 3 key features of such a culture. They are features that I think would be in a culture for quality questioning in general, but for student questions in particular. The first one, we've got to get kids away from that idea that we are just about producing right answers in our classroom, to helping them understand that questions are to open the doors for learning, both teacher and student questions. There are, as many a teacher has said, no dumb questions when they're related to the content. A second feature of a culture that's so very important is having a rhythm in the classroom where students have an opportunity to get their voice in, to make a bid, so to speak, for the floor. And this comes through our use in a very consistent fashion of think time and our teaching students how to use it. And finally, I think we would agree that there are ways that we can very directly value our students' contributions through questions and invite them to voice those. But I want to take you back to the time for students to pose questions and ask you to look now into the classroom of our Jordan Whaley and Lori Woodrow, who were making time and space day in and day out through very intentional use of think time. But in the upcoming video, you're going to hear their 6th graders engage in dialogue about the value of think time for their learning in general and for their ability to pose questions in particular.
Jordan Whaley and Lori Woodrow believe that student understanding and use of think times transform the learning culture in their sixth grade classroom. With time to think, students took greater ownership of their learning and became more comfortable asking questions of their own. In this classroom, students enjoy opportunities for periodic think time dialogues, during which they collaboratively reflect on the value of think time to their learning.
First of all, what is the purpose of Think Time 1? Why do we even do it?
What is the question asking, or what do I think I know about the topic, or what question do I have about the topic that we're reading? I think Think Time 1 is important because it's your time to ask questions, and when you ask questions, it gets other people's minds thinking.
So what is our purpose of Think Time 2?
I think Think Time 2 is important because for the listeners, it gives them time to think if they agree with the speaker or disagree.
I think the purpose of Think Time 2 is like when the responder is saying like a question, we can say, do we agree or disagree? And like if we agree, we can also add on to it and like give them a reason why we agree. I agree with James because if you have like a different question than them and you're wanting to ask them about it, when you have the chance to, you can ask them and they'll ask you if they disagree with you or not.
It gives people a second chance to say, well, I disagree with you, or I agree, and start a new question or a new topic, or getting other people to think, well, I never thought about that. How did you think that way? Or what makes you think that? Or, well, could you explain to me how you're thinking that, because I don't understand at all.
I just read a comment in the chat box about the use of think time. This is perhaps known to you as wait time. I prefer to use that term, think time, particularly with students, because it tells them what to do with the pauses in the classroom. And you saw from the charts in Jordan and Laurie's classroom that we need to explicitly teach our students about the silence. That may make them uncomfortable at first, that may embarrass them at first, but that will give them that space, that room in a lesson to ask their questions. And so this hour is going much too quickly for me. We're coming to the near end of it. I hope you have formed some questions, have recorded them in the chat box, because we're going to have some time left for that. And I would prefer there not just be silence. But before we get there, I'll return to the why. Our first focus question, why bother with students as questions? Why take the time to teach students these skills of questioning? Why might you want to even read this book, Empowering Students as Questioners, which I hope many of you will? I've asked my friend and colleague, Beth Sadas, who has co-authored a number of the books with me, the quality questioning books for Corwin, to synthesize some of your ideas expressed in the chat box at the very beginning of our session. What, Beth, did you see as some emerging ideas, emerging thoughts from our participants as we began?
Jackie, much of what you said and the students said and the teachers said reinforced what the participants today have said. I didn't get a chance to read all of them, of course, but I did see 5 main ideas that I'd like to share with people. The first one had to do with how do students really benefit? And the comments were about they're more engaged when they're questioning, they have a better sense of creativity, and they develop confidence. They think more deeply or at more higher levels. And someone even said, you have to be brave to ask a question. And these students, if my students were going to ask questions, they'd have to develop a lot of confidence. So I think that has to do with the culture as well. The second main idea are the ideas that fit into the second topic we've heard from teachers too, is how do teachers benefit if students are asking questions? And that's probably pretty evident having watched these great videos. Teachers learn what students actually know, what they're thinking and how they're thinking. They're able to learn and check for understanding as they hear students ask questions, and they can help the students go deeper in their meaning making. The third category, well, I don't really have a title for that. To understand that sometimes they just flat out need to ask questions because they don't understand, and it's fine to ask questions if it's going to help you understand better and clarify what you don't know. It was interesting. There was a category almost of the benefit of social learning, and that is, someone said you need to ask questions of others to broaden your own perspectives. So when you ask a question and maybe your teacher answers, but maybe a small group of students that you're working with answers, you learn more about how there are different ways of seeing a particular topic.
That reminds me, Beth, of what the kids in the video early on said, the 8th graders, that they really got more out of questions that were asked of one another sometimes than they did from teacher questions. So thank you for that synthesis. And just to kind of close it out, I hope each of you have deepened your understanding or lengthened your response to this question, why student questions. I wanted to share with you one of my big whys, and that is I truly believe, after working in depth on this topic over time, that when students ask questions, they do deepen their understanding of content knowledge, of the ideas emerging from the curriculum. They better understand other people, and they better understand themselves. And so with that, I'd like for you to take just a few seconds as we end and toss the ball back to Jeff to bring closure to your learning. I hope consolidating your thinking about potential benefits, remembering the 4 categories and identifying that one that might be most important to your students, recalling the student mind frames and thinking of potential value. Would you take the time to teach these to your students? And then thinking about some of the strategies and structures I shared with you. I hope that this has whetted your appetite to learn more about student questions and student questioning. And I hope you generated some questions. So Jeff, I'll toss the ball back to you to hear if we have any wonderings from our audience this afternoon.
Terrific. We sure do. And we have time for a couple of two questions, and then we'll turn it over to Olivia. So the first question, do you have any suggestions as how we as teachers can formally track the effects of questioning? Is there a way to track it in some way?
Wow, what a deep question. Well, I think first of all, just to begin by keeping a count of how many student questions are posed and by which students. And with that quantitative data, perhaps then to look at some other quantitative data, and that would be student engagement in class through participation in activities, student performance on quizzes and tests. I think it would be possible to design a nice little action research project that might be done in a collaborative team to really look at the impact that this had on not just your class, but on individual students. And I would say, going back to the classroom that you viewed last, that 6th grade classroom, in the full video available in the book, you would hear Lori and Jordan talk about students who were inclusion students, who had never volunteered at all to speak in class, who actually participated in the video that is available through the book. So I think there's anecdotal evidence, but I do think we could design a little mini study to track.
That's terrific. Thank you. Um, One more question. Somebody asked that they're interested to learn how we can develop other teachers at the school to develop students to engage in this work effectively. How do you develop teachers to apply this type of learning?
Another really good question. Well, my deep belief after many years of engaging in the facilitation of professional learning is that the best learning is done in collaborative teams in a job embedded setting. And so I would say the way to engage others is for someone in a team to bring the idea to the team, to use student questions as one of those pieces that you want to look at, even as you design lesson plans day in and day out, to engage your colleagues in talking about what kinds of questions would be most valuable given these four types. And I would just say to the person who posed that question, I believe there are tools and strategies and ideas in this book that you could take and use with a team tomorrow, that it's not really rocket science. It's very doable. And I think the teachers I worked with in Oxford would echo that sentiment. So working collaboratively, you know, and that involves planning together, visiting one another's classrooms. And I think with that, I'll put a period on that statement, Jeff. Thank you.
Terrific. That brings us close to the bottom of the hour. So now would be a good time to turn it over to Marketing Manager Olivia Bartlett to discuss some topics as well.
Great. Thank you so much, Jeff. And thank you so much to Jackie, and thank you to everyone who's joined us and participated today. If you have any questions that didn't get answered today, you are free to send them to us at info@corwin.com, and we'll get those answered for you. Before we get to the giveaway of results, I just wanted to remind you all that you'll be receiving a follow-up email within the next few days that'll include the webinar recording, the slides, and a certificate of attendance. So make sure to add us at info@k12.corwin.com and add us to your safe list to make sure that you receive that email. And now 2 of you will be winning a copy of Empowering Students as Questioners. So our 2 winners for today's webinar are Deborah Morgan and Jordan Weathers. So congratulations to you both. To claim your prizes, please contact us at info@corwin.com and we can get your information and send those to you. And of course, if you didn't win and you'd like to purchase one of Jackie's books, you can use the promo code webinars to get 20% off and free shipping on your order. Thank you all so much again for joining us, and we hope that you'll join us again for another Corwin Monday afternoon webinar in the future. Goodbye.
Goodbye. Thank you all so much.